I'm Ryan. Bill O'Reilly says the Liberals want to eliminate the Electoral College and marginalize the white vote.
I'm Ryan. We'll discuss whether he's drunk or sober when we return.
You know, Betty White really is the greatest Golden Girl. Choosy parents choose Jif. He's so mean. He really is. Hey Ryan, are we out of partisan again? Now before we get to our talking points, we have a delicious brew that we'd like to talk about today. What do we got, Ryan?
We've got Diesel Punk Stout.
And what is a stout?
Now, a stout is the darkest of the beers. It's going to have typically a rich, malty flavor. It's going to be deep. It's going to be dark. And a good stout's going to be smooth because typically you're going to age a stout for a long period of time, which really helps blend the flavors together. This one clocks in at, what is it, 5.8%? So it's nice. Not even a lightish stout. So what are you thinking?
Definitely smells sweet. Sometimes they can smell, I describe it as nutty. I think you describe it as acidic. I don't actually get hardly any of that. It's definitely sweet to me. It tastes sweet. Sometimes they can have kind of a burnt or roasted kind of flavor to them, I think.
Yes.
This one, if it does have it, it's very light on that to me.
Yes, so the roasting flavor, that deep dark flavor you're talking about, that comes from actually roasting the malts longer and more. And so you can get into an issue if it's too much or if it's too roasted, you can get that burnt flavor, or if you don't roast it properly, you just get a burnt flavor. This definitely doesn't have that. It's really smooth.
It's really smooth.
It is on the sweet side like you're talking about, but it's not bad. It's not unbalanced sweet. There's enough body to go with it. Also, I'm going to point out that the level of carbonation is really light. It's a lightly carbonated stout, which kind of really helps it feel smoother as well. Not quite as smooth as like a nitro, but really smooth.
Yeah, I like a lot of times stouts. People describe them as thick. I mean, it is thick compared to like a Pilsner or something like that.
Right.
But I think I could probably drink 3 of these in a row and not feel too bloated, which is nice.
Yeah. So all in all, I think this is a great beer.
Agreed. Cheers.
Cheers.
And I want to thank, what we got here? Diesel Punk. We are not sponsored by them. They did not tell us to do this, but we appreciate that we have their delicious beer to put in our mouths.
Agreed.
All right, moving on to talking points. Madam Brewmaster.
Bill O'Reilly says Clinton wins popular vote by 2.8 million. California provides the entire margin, 4.3 million. If the Electoral College is abolished, only big states and cities matter. This only benefits the Democrats, as cities have heavy minority populations who vote Democrat. This would not be a national election. Drunk or sober?
So, I think he's not terribly drunk, only because I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's being idealistic. So I have him clocking in as a 0.14.
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, he's kind of drunk, but not crazy. Because I think it's nice to think that the Electoral College was created for that reason, to kind of give us a national vote. And perhaps it was. But when you look at how America is spread out now and how populations have formed, you see that's really not a national vote in my opinion. For instance, you can win the presidency with fewer than 14 states from the Electoral College. Now, I actually think it's 12 states, but in case I did fuzzy math, I gave myself a variance of 2 states. So 14 states or fewer. And if you don't like that because it's theoretical, well, let's consider how candidates campaign. So they campaign really focusing on 2 areas. 1, they focus on the big states. Bill O'Reilly is worried that it'll resort to just big states, but they're still important today. In my estimation, there are 4 big states that you have to win at least 2 of if you're going to win the election. That's California, Texas, New York, and Florida. You need at least 2, all right? So there are some ways you can get there without doing that, but the way America votes, yeah, it's really tough. And so when you count all those swing states, again, you're looking at fewer than 14 states. There's a huge part of the country that is ignored because they already vote a certain way historically. So there's no value in going to try to maintain their vote, and there's little value in trying to flip their vote because their electoral votes just aren't that important. It's more important to get the swing state. So you're wholly ignored in large parts of the country, which I think takes away from the national vote. So what I want to look at now is what it would look like with a popular vote, you know, with the big cities and big states that he's talking about. We're going to play a game.
Oh, I'm excited. Okay.
All right, so the game is you are the Democratic candidate.
Okay.
Because he says the cities are going to benefit you.
Okay.
Okay. For this game, I'm going to give you 100% of the city vote.
Okay.
All right, because again, he says it's the cities that would have swayed the popular vote.
Okay.
So I'm going to give it all to you.
I'm good.
Okay. Now, what I think he's implying is that this is a simple task now for the Democrats. You're just going to go to big cities and big states, right?
Okay.
I want you to name, I'm going to give you the entire metropolitan areas of
Okay.
the city. So not just the city, the metro area.
Okay.
I want you to just start naming which cities you would campaign in to win the popular vote. And let me know when you think you've campaigned in enough.
Okay.
And I'll count them.
So we would definitely start with Los Angeles, maybe San Francisco, New York City for sure. We're going to go with Dallas, Washington, D.C., Chicago, maybe Houston, Portland.
Ooh, Portland. I bet that's rolling right off the tongue. You forgot Florida.
And,
Florida.
Oh, Miami.
Uh-huh.
Even Jacksonville.
Okay. If you want. You tell me when you think you've gotten there.
Well, I guarantee you I haven't. But I'm. That's about all the cities.
How many more would you like to add? You're at 10.
Oh, let's double it.
Double it.
Okay, 20.
So you think you need 20
Sure.
to win the popular vote? He's absolutely correct. It's 20.
Oh!
Look how much you struggled to figure out which big states and big cities are required.
Right.
You need 20.
Okay.
More specifically here, you need 20 assuming you get 100%. Every single person in those metro areas only votes for you. So at 20 cities, and by the way, because it's metro areas, that's across about 25 states.
Oh.
So we're already at more of a national vote.
Is 25 more than 14?
It really is.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a scientist, or a mathematician. But yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
You guys can fact check that out there.
All right.
So that's if you get 100%. If you needed 70%, let's say that seems probably more of what would happen.
Okay.
Maybe 70%. I even think that's even a little high. But if you got 70%, you need 35 cities.
Okay.
Okay. Across more states, I didn't count the states. One of the things I want to point out is in that first 20, one of the cities you forgot. Riverside, California.
Oh, of course.
Riverside, right? You guys were thinking that.
Yeah, for sure.
And in the top 35, you would need Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh.
All right, now, if you need 60% of the vote, you need approximately 45 states. All right?
Cities?
Yeah, I'm sorry, cities. 45 cities, again, across more states. One of my favorites there is Providence, Rhode Island.
Oh.
One you would need.
The liberal bastion.
Yes, and it's the biggest city in the tiniest state, I believe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so you'd have to campaign there. I wonder if they get a lot of campaigning now. And then finally, this is my favorite fact. If you had to go to 52 cities, you are going to Grand Rapids, Wyoming. Oh, Wyoming. That's one of those cities that are wholly ignored. Actually, the whole state's gone. And I meant state, not city. So my point is, yeah, it will change the way we campaign to some extent. But I'm not so sure, based on these numbers, that it is a less national vote or that it's an easy task, which he makes it sound like. He just says, New York, LA, Chicago, done. No, you're not done. You're going to have to go 20 deep here. So, next round?
First of all, I love that game. That was fantastic. That was great. So, shocker, I'm going to come at this a little bit differently. He says Clinton wins the popular vote by 2.8 million, but California provides the entire margin of like 4.3 million. So yeah, I mean, if you just disregard a state of 39 million people and an economy the size of France, the whole election changes. Crazy.
By the way, I think it's the 6th largest economy in the world. California, the state of.
Just get rid of that and things are different. Really?
Shocker.
And if you get rid of the state of Texas, which is Trump's largest victory, he actually doesn't win the Electoral College.
Oh, wow.
He only clocks in at 268.
Oh, wow.
So
he needed a huge state.
Yeah, interestingly, you can't just change and get rid of things to make your point. It's ridiculous. Anyway, beyond that, actually, I forgot to tell you. I think he's a little sloppy here.
Oh, really?
I got him at a 0.18.
0.18.
0.18, a little sloppy. So his next point is, he says, if abolished, only the big cities or big states, kind of like what you talked about. But he actually lists some states, and I couldn't remember them all. He said, you could essentially go to Philadelphia, Dallas, Fort Worth, Miami, New York City, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, and Houston. Okay. And he just says, and that's basically what you need. So I'm going to give you some perspective. Those states, those metro areas, have a population of about 26 million people. Now, the 3 states that Trump won that determined the Electoral College, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, total he won those states by 78,000 votes. Those 3 states have a population of 28.5 million.
Oh, wow.
So the 10 massive cities he's talking about have less population than 3 cities or 3 states that don't have such huge Pennsylvania, pretty decent population, but these aren't big. So to give you an idea, he won Michigan by 11,000 votes. He won Wisconsin by 23,000, and Pennsylvania by 44,000. So that win margin that gave him the 46 electoral votes he needed, they were super close. So if Clinton had won them, Clinton would have won the Electoral College. This is why these 3 states are important. If he maintained that margin of victory, in order to get to Clinton's popular vote expansion, he would need that win margin across 110 states. Oh, wow. So right. I'm going to give you some more perspective on how much more she actually won by.
Okay.
People hearken back to the Founding Fathers and the intent of things and what they intended with this stuff. How would they feel about these things today? Well, she actually won by more than the population of the United States in 1776.
Right.
So
that's a lot.
It's an enormous amount, and that's why people are talking about it, because it's an enormous amount. On to the next point, he says it only benefits Democrats. That's really just another way of saying it only benefits minorities. He specifically links minorities to voting for Democrats.
He absolutely does, yes.
And so, I guess if he's saying it only benefits minorities, does that mean that right now it's only beneficial to Republicans, or it's only beneficial to white people?
Correct. So, I was thinking about this too. When you say marginalizing somebody, I think and you would say that it marginalizes the whites or the white voters if we go to cities. Is the opposite true today, where our current system marginalizes the minorities? Interesting that you would bring that up.
So, my next point is, he says that it's not a national election if we do this, right?
Right.
So we assume that when he says national, he means varying viewpoints. Because if it's certain things, then it's only concentrated in certain areas.
Fair representation for all.
Exactly, right? Okay, so here we go. If you look at the maps, look at the 3 states, the 3 states that we talked about that he wins. You see where they are physically. And then you look at the 9 cities, 10 if you included the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, and you look at where they are and see how far they're spread apart. You kind of talked about this too. Additionally, if we look at the we look at the demographic makeup of those 3 cities, of those 3 states. Excuse me. They're roughly 80% white.
Right.
If you look at the cities, excuse me.
Great. I'm glad you did this. I'm curious what the cities look like.
The cities average 52% white. Now, the national average is about 62% white.
So, are you trying to show us that if we presume white people vote Republican because minorities vote Democrat, he should win the cities?
No.
Okay.
I am pointing out that the cities are actually closer to the national demographic average than those 3 states.
Oh, fair representation.
Closer to fair representation.
Right. But I'm going to hop on that.
Yeah.
Would you agree that if more of the city is white, and he's saying minorities are the ones in the cities that are voting for the Democrats, and that's why they'd win, he should still win the cities?
Yeah.
Right?
52%.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Cheers.
Cheers. Madam Brewmaster.
Bill O'Reilly says the heart of liberalism is race. Drunk or sober?
I'll start here. This one's kind of simple. It's kind of short for me. I've got him drunk legally at a .10.
Okay.
So not terrible, but you know, he's obviously a little bit drunk. I think the heart of it is people.
Okay.
And he looks at it that way because in very broad terms, liberals recognize race, and conservatives try not to see it. And so so and the reason it's pretty simple for me is because that if you're a white guy, you've got the luxury of not seeing it.
Right.
And it is very defining in the United States specifically. Race is very defining if you're not white. But so yeah, I mean, there's a good portion of it that's centered on race, but it's not race specifically. It's people in the recognition.
Okay.
Next round.
So I have him. I tackled this similarly. I actually have him at .07. I put him just slightly sober.
Okay.
Because I agree with you. Race is a pretty decent chunk of what liberals kind of focus on in our country, right? I don't think he's nailed it here. I think he went really simplistic, but it's hard to argue that that's not a big deal, right? To liberals and the left. But I would say the heart of liberalism is, and I'm going to get myself in trouble here, so I'm having fun, is equality for minorities and compassion for the poor.
Okay.
All right, so it's people-centric. Now, where I'm getting myself in trouble, so don't throw stones at me here, is I think academically they think it's equality for all.
Okay.
And we've talked a little bit about this, but we didn't really kind of firmly state our positions on this in the past. But when I'm talking about the liberals, I want to be clear, I'm talking about liberal media. Right, I can't, again, kind of group too many people together.
Sure.
So it's how they're kind of presenting it, right? So I think they think academically that it's all about everyone's equality. But I just think there is a sharp lack of compassion for the majority when the majority is mistreated. I think they note it. I do think, again, academically, they care about it.
Yes.
And the way I'm going to try to get myself out of this hole I just dug myself into is my point is that I actually understand that. The benefit, kind of what you're hinting at about being the majority is you really don't need people to stick up for you.
Right.
You don't need it. So the fact that they don't have the passion behind it, it makes sense. It's very human. I think it is more important that academically they see themselves as equality for all. But I just think in practice, it's really focused on equality for the minorities. Last call.
Cheers.
Cheers. Madam Brewmaster, next talking point.
Bill O'Reilly says abolishing the Electoral College is all about race. The left views white privilege as an oppressive force, so white voters must be marginalized. Drunk or sober?
So my heart tells me he is crazy drunk. But my logic is going to play it safer and make him a .12.
Okay.
All right. And
so drunk, but not crazy drunk.
Not crazy drunk, because some of this, I've given, again, the benefit of the doubt, some of this hinges on strategy.
Okay.
Right? So he says they want to marginalize the white vote. I have no idea what the Democratic Party wants to do. That very well could be their strategy. That's why I didn't go crazy drunk. But I don't think it is, and I want them to be crazy drunk, but it could be their strategy. I've known politicians to be very stupid in their strategies. In fact, we just saw it in this election with their Democratic candidate being Hillary Clinton. So
yeah, not the greatest strategy.
Right, very poor strategy. So, so first, I don't know what their strategy is. So I'm going to take it from a slightly different angle now. So I want to point out that neither party cares how the election is won. Not at all. They don't care if it's electoral votes. They don't care if it's popular vote. They just want to win the election. They don't care if it's a drunk monkey throwing darts, so long as the dart lands on their candidate.
Right.
They don't care. All right? So I just want to be really honest about that.
It's about winning.
Yes, it's about winning all the time. So when we talk about now the marginalizing of whites, I would actually argue that perhaps, as we've kind of talked about with the Electoral College, the white community is already marginalized. So again, we talked about how many states you need to win and which states people campaign in. And there's a giant part of our country that no one campaigns in. It starts, really, they don't even campaign in Texas, and that's a really major one.
Big one.
But it's mainly white, and it's big, and it mainly votes Republican. So you got Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, North South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Missouri, large parts of the South. They're not largely white in comparison, but again, we ignore a lot of these Republican with a high degree of white population states.
Right.
So I would say they're probably marginalized. And when you consider that Trump lost by 2.8 million votes, and the popular vote would make every vote count. And keep in mind, if you vote in a red state, and you would vote red, but you know you're being ignored, you're probably not motivated to go out and vote. We know across the country, fewer than 60% of eligible voters voted.
That's not a lot.
That's right. So now I say it's a popular vote. Hey, Republicans in these states that are ignored, your vote counts now. You need to make up 2.8 million votes. But across all those states I just listed, I would like to think they could find 2.8 million, considering 40% of each state didn't vote.
Yeah, it's not a ton.
Right. So I think today it could be argued they're already marginalized. And so the strategy of going to a popular vote doesn't necessarily marginalize them more.
Interesting.
Next round?
I'm going with my heart. I went with 0.23. I'm saying that he's pretty blitzed here. He says that white privilege is an oppressive force, and so we need to marginalize white people. First off, Bill O'Reilly has said on Jon Stewart, I think it was, that white privilege is a real thing. So he acknowledges that it is a force. But he's conflating two issues. He's conflating white people and white privilege. So white privilege is not something that is necessarily perpetrated by people. It's something that's perpetrated by a system. So you can change rules and not marginalize people. He's getting two things mixed up, and I think he's doing it on purpose. Additionally, the liberals aren't talking about, they talk about race a lot, but they're not talking about race when it comes to the Electoral College. Bill O'Reilly is the only one talking about race when it comes to the Electoral College here. And lastly, the idea that they're trying to marginalize white people, I think, is incorrect. It may be ancillary, but I think the liberal point of view is, with going with a popular vote, we're trying to marginalize locations. I think that's what the heart of it is. And that's because those locations have less people. And if locations have less people, why should those people's vote have a heavier weight?
So I have a question for you. I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Yes.
So you're saying Bill O'Reilly is confusing white privilege and white people.
Yes.
Right? If you're a white person, do you inherently suffer from white privilege, and does that inherently come out in your policies?
You do inherently suffer from it. I don't know that it.
Sorry, benefit from it.
Yes.
Wrong word.
Whatever. But I don't know that I don't know that it automatically comes out in your policies.
Okay, because that's what I think he's trying to paint. Right? If you're white, you're going to present white privilege policy. So we need to marginalize you so that doesn't happen.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
So yeah.
So one thing I forgot to mention, I want to be really fair here. I forgot to actually state why the Democrats want to get rid of the Electoral College. It's really twofold. First, I don't think they see value in it, and it's really tough to demonstrate value in it. 90% of the time, the Electoral College and the popular vote match.
Oh, it's actually even more than that. I think 5 times in history.
How many?
Oh, you know what that is? That is right.
Yep, there you go. So,
yeah,
5 times
90%.
in history. 90% of the time it matches. So you're going to have to tell me the compelling reason for why we care 10% of the time, right? That's only that much of it, though. The bigger issue is that they're whiny babies. They lost the election. That's it. They're just whiny.
It's to that point, it's not as though they didn't know the playing field.
Right. Everybody agreed by the rules, and they played, and they lost. So they want to change it because they lost. As I said, they don't care how they win so long as they win. Cheers.
Cheers.
Madam Brewmaster.
Bill O'Reilly says white men largely abandoned the Democrats, and the left blames racism and wanting to punish minorities to keep them down. Drunk or sober?
I think that he's pretty-ish drunk. I gave him stumbly. I gave him a 0.18. And it's not because what he's saying is entirely false. It's just kind of not accurate entirely. So the assertion that the white men are abandoning the Democrats isn't really accurate. Not that there's a lot of support from white men to Democrats. Historically, so over the last 16 elections, so since Eisenhower, white men have only voted for the Democrat 3 times. They voted for Carter over Ford, voted for Johnson over Goldwater, and Kennedy over Nixon. To be fair, McCain and Obama tied at 50% for the vote of white men. But it's not like they're going away in droves. They've never really been there. Again, to be fair to his point, they did vote this election at a much higher rate for Trump than they have in other elections. So they are going away to some degree, but they're not. It's not this tidal wave because it never existed. And I don't think the Democrats blame racism and the desire to punish minorities. This is where his drunken level came up for me. I have never once heard a liberal or a Democrat say, you know, white people really just want to punish minorities. No? I think that is an asinine assertion.
Okay. No.
I think they blame apathy and just the complete lack of empathy for another position. That's pretty much it. You got next round?
Yeah, so I'm similar to you. I actually went with the drunken uncle 0.13. Okay, so I actually thought he's kind of correct too, but the more statements he makes, the drunker he became. And he might be more than a 0.13. I don't know what a drunken uncle is.
That's good.
But you know, you're sitting around, you know, Christmas time, and your uncle starts talking, and he sounds normal, and then he just says something like crazy. You're like, oh, that's drunk Uncle Billy, you know, or something like that, right? So I'm going with a 0.13.
Okay.
He definitely is drunk. I think he starts off, again, right, with a correct statistic. White men have left or are leaving the Democratic Party. I think it's important to note that doesn't mean they're joining the Republican Party, right? It just means they're going to vote Republican, much like I've both voted Republican and Democrat across the board and many times.
Sure.
Right? Because I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. So, but they aren't voting Democrat. And I believe this statistic is correct, and maybe you looked it up. I believe in general, since I think it's Carter,
okay.
Only about 40% of white people even vote Democrat.
I think you're probably close.
I think that's the average, is 40%.
Okay.
So even if you look at where we are today in how they vote, yeah, it's a little bit low. It's low. But, you know, again, with Obama, actually, the first election was quite high.
Yes.
Right? Because that was Obama and McCain.
Yeah, that was seriously good.
And it's dropped off since then, but what we know is, on average, it really doesn't fluctuate a ton. I think overall, I think this election was 36% is what the white voting was for the Democrat. So there's that. I agree. But we have seen since the early 90s, in fact, that white men have voted less and less in general for the Democrat. But again, I don't think it's a tidal wave either. Now he starts to get a little bit more drunk when he talks about, you know, racism being the reason for this. Again, I'm actually giving him a little bit more credit here, but only because I'm going to assume we're talking about this election. Okay. And something was very different about this election. We had Donald Trump. We have lots of social media. We have much more media than we've ever had. And one of the big things that was going on, thanks to media, was Trump rallies. Right. And I do think the liberal media, oftentimes, whether or not they beat around the bush or not, they insinuated there is some level of racism at the Trump rallies. Okay. So I'm giving a little bit of credit there, but we all recognize, I think, that the type of person that would go to a rally doesn't represent all of anybody. It's the same type of people that call into a radio show. I mean, across the board, how many of us have actually called into a radio show? Yeah, they got plenty of people, but most of us don't spend hardly any time doing it.
It's probably the super fans.
Right, exactly. Same with the rallies, right? So, but there is, I think, discussion of racism thanks to this election. Secondly, and this is probably the most important fact, is the Democratic candidate referred to Trump supporters as deplorables. Okay, so if she's the voice of liberals, though not necessarily, we have Bernie Sanders, we got other people there, but you know,
at least of that party at that moment.
Exactly, a large party of people. She referred to them as deplorables, and I think there's a bunch of racial sentiment associated with that.
Sure.
So to say that racism isn't part of that, as insinuated by the liberal media, I think would be incorrect for this election specifically. So we got a little bit more drunk. He took advantage of something there. Now, finally, this punitive thing that we talked about. I've never heard that. I've never heard the statement that they're racist and they want to punish minorities. No, I think it's much simpler that, we've talked about this. The first time I ever heard the term white lash was from a black liberal. And if anyone was going to play the racist card, you would think it would be a black liberal.
Right.
He didn't. He said white lash is just white people being upset that they're not reaping the benefits that minorities are getting. Not that they want to punish minorities.
Right.
They just feel overlooked, unacknowledged, and they want something that they're not getting. And that's the opposite of being punitive and wanting to punish them. Final call.
Cheers. On to, I believe,
our last point, Madam Brewmaster.
Bill O'Reilly says the way to change the way America is run is by taking voting power away from the white precincts. Drunk or sober?
So, I think he's quite drunk. I mean, he's at least a point. I've already talked about, and actually all of our talking points kind of led up to this moment, which I like. That I've talked about whether or not the white voters are marginalized now or whether they'd be more marginalized later. So I'm not really going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about whether or not replacing a president is a good idea just for change. And what we're talking about is maintaining change. He said it's the most effective, quick way to do it. So we replace presidents quite often. So what I think he's saying is if you want to get somebody in office and then keep that party in office. So what does that look like? And whether or not marginalizing the white precincts is doing that. So first of all, I don't think the president is the best way to implement change anyway. I actually think Congress is the more powerful of the two.
They absolutely are.
Right, he's singularly the most powerful person, but when we're talking about actually affecting change in America, it's Congress.
They are by far the most powerful branch.
Right, exactly. So if we're talking about presidents, though, I think his whole argument is built on a fallacy. And we've seen this across the board, and we're going to continue to see this in every single discussion we have. And that's the fallacy that there are two groups in the United States. Liberals and conservatives. That's it. That's all that exists. Well, no, that's not true. We have Democrats and Republicans, and we have everyone else. That's it. It's not two. It's Democrats, Republicans, and everyone else who have some shade of liberal and conservative views. And we say things like right-leaning or left-leaning or moderate. And no, that's not a thing. We take you and then make you a Republican or a Democrat based on that. No. You have Republicans, Democrats, everyone else. And so this idea that marginalizing someone is the best way to get either Republican or Democrat in office, I think actually does not give you consistency. The only thing that's been consistent in the White House is indeed change. Consider this, since Eisenhower, we've swapped parties 8 times in the White House. It's about every 8 years. We switch from Democrat...
Couple exceptions.
Right,
sure.
Exactly. And I can actually list them all, but I'm not going to. So 8 times we've switched parties. Is it because Republicans are suddenly becoming Democratic and Democrats are suddenly becoming Republican every 8 years? No, it's that group of the people. It's a group of people that are not Republicans or Democrats that we try to call Republicans or Democrats or conservatives and liberals that just get fed up every 8 years. They're willing to give 8 years to somebody most of the time. And then they say, screw it. And they're only voting for their self-interest. That's it. They look at what they care about at that time and they vote for the person they hope might supply the thing they're looking for. So what I think we need to stop doing, if you want to actually get consistency, is we need to stop highlighting our differences and creating two buckets for people. And we should find the things that tie us all together. If you can find that candidate, then you will, and you put them in the White House and they provide those things, anyone under that party will continue to be elected. And those things, I've tried to outline some of them here. I have it down to three things. First, the accumulation of wealth. That's the ability to actually earn a wage, a living wage, or better. Second, stability. That is to know that your job is there and will stay there, and that more jobs will be available for you to increase your opportunities and your wealth. Third, safety. And I'm talking about a roof over your head. I'm talking about the lack of fear from physical harm. If you give me a candidate who will give me those three things, that person's getting into the White House. And one thing I want to point out is it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you start with our physical needs, we'll tackle the emotional needs next. And for all those people that are liberal and think we have race issues and religious issues and all these equality things, those, when you take care of a person physically, they're more likely to look outwardly and how to take care of others. And those come next. Social change comes after physical needs are met. You got next round?
I do. That was great, by the way.
Thank you.
So I also put him in as being a pretty drunk guy. I actually clocked him at a 0.28. I give him a drunken stupor.
Oh, I don't disagree. I like that. So the higher the better.
He says, what, the way to change America is by taking the voting power away from the white precincts? Okay, so let's start. Why should the voting power be centered in the white precincts?
It shouldn't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Let's move on. His point, again, these aren't mutually exclusive. It's not as though changing the system means the white people in those precincts aren't allowed to vote anymore.
That's true. Yeah.
Interesting. So the idea about removing the Electoral College, it's about counting actual votes. Right? Individual votes. Your vote now actually counts. And it's weird that if you listen to people and you don't listen to places and you actually become the most popular candidate, that means you would actually need to appeal to people.
You do.
People. And so think about this. He's talking about marginalizing votes and how votes aren't counting. In California, the state, that you can just disregard.
Yes.
4 million people voted for Trump, or more than 4 million people. Literally, their votes didn't count. They could have stayed home, and nothing would have changed with the way California voted.
Right. To your point, I mentioned that all those people in the red states who didn't vote because of apathy, because they're going to be red. Similarly, in California, it's going to be a blue state. 4 million people can stay home. They're voting blue.
So if you take that and you spread that across all of the states, you get a total of, now this is at the last count.
Okay.
54,561,996 people could have not voted, and there would have literally been no change in the Electoral College.
That's an amazing statistic.
So think about that. Almost 55 million people could have done nothing. Nothing different. No change. And this is the system that Bill O'Reilly says represents the people the best.
That's amazing.
And so I would say that the argument of abolishing the Electoral College would actually be to make every vote count.
That is the argument. And I want to point out, by the way, I am not saying I'm pro-Electoral College or pro-popular vote.
I would agree.
Right? We are just simply talking about whether or not his arguments hold any water at all.
And
the benefits.
And again, I just think he is, like, seriously, drunken stupor, baby.
He likes what he likes.
He
likes
does.
to drink and he likes to talk.
Last call?
Cheers.
Cheers, brother. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like us, subscribe.
Definitely subscribe.
Share.
Tell your friends.
Leave a comment.
We'll answer a comment. Cheers.
Next time. It's good beer.
Indeed.